Hey guys, today we're talking about Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. Buffett is, of course, one of history's greatest investors, and Berkshire Hathaway is the conglomerate he oversees. It owns companies such as Duracell, Benjamin Moore, Geico, and Dairy Queen in their entirety, while also controlling big chunks of companies like Apple, American Express, Bank of America, and Coca-Cola. For well over a decade, one of the biggest questions surrounding Berkshire has not been who will they acquire next, but who will take over after Buffett, born in 1930, either dies or retires. Among Americans, probably only Supreme Court justices face a higher level of that sort of morbid speculation. There was a time, though, not that long ago, when people thought they knew. It was going to be David Sokol, and then he threw it all away. Warren Buffett's successor has been speculated about for so long that there's almost a mythology that's developed around it. And why not? The person who succeeds him will arguably be second to only the chairman of the Federal Reserve in terms of power in the American financial system. Remember, during the Great Financial Crisis, Berkshire played a large role in keeping behemoths like Goldman Sachs, General Electric, and Bank of America solvent. They might not be quite as big as an Apple or an Amazon on their own, but they're willing to be greedy when others are fearful. Responding to questions about who might replace him, Buffett has always said that he has an envelope in his desk with the name of the person or persons sealed inside. It's generally believed that he will actually have two successors, the CEO to Berkshire and the person who manages Berkshire's investment portfolio. But at the end of the day, someone has to be the one making the call. And in 2011, David Sokol was the leading candidate. Sokol came to Berkshire by way of Mid-American Energy, which Buffett purchased in 1999. He stayed on as the company's chairman and grew Mid-American until it became a significant revenue producer for Berkshire. From there, the love affair was on. Buffett gave Sokol more opportunities, and he succeeded more often than not. He was made chairman of Johns Manville, a roofing and insulation company, and turned that around. He was sent to China to do due diligence on automaker BYD, recommended it positively, and Berkshire ended up making a highly profitable investment based on his advice there. And finally, he was installed as CEO of NetJets and succeeded there as well. The press dubbed him Buffett's Mr. Fix-It. In the foreword of Sokol's book, Pleased But Not Satisfied, Buffett writes, "He brings the business equivalent of Ted Williams' .406 batting average to the field of business management." On top of all that, Suffolk was an Omaha boy who grew up working a paper route just like Buffett. Fast forward to early 2011, and Sokol proposes to Buffett that Berkshire consider acquiring a specialty chemicals company called Lubrizol. Buffett wasn't super interested at first, but he said he'd take a look. At the time, he asked Sokol how to even come upon this company, and Sokol tells him, well, he owns some shares. Over time, whatever due diligence Buffett performed on Lubrizol made the company appear more appealing because eventually he ends up acquiring it. Sokol, who had a $10 million position, made $3 million on the trade. Everything seemed great until, on a congratulatory phone call with Buffett, an investment banker from Citibank mentioned how happy they were that Citi was able to introduce Lubrizol to Sokol. And that is when things started to unravel. Here's the problem. When Sokol told Buffett he came to know Lubrizol by owning the stock, he was at best misleading by omission. Buffett, understandably, believed Sokol had been a long-standing shareholder of Lubrizol, but here's the actual timeline as laid out by Berkshire's audit committee. Sokol, owning 0 shares of Lubrizol, met with some investment bankers from Citibank and told them to send some ideas about potential targets in the chemicals industry. He then requested additional information on 3 of the companies, including Lubrizol, and finally he met with the bankers and tells them that he's really only interested in one, and it's Lubrizol. They tell him pretty much, that's great, we've got a relationship with the CEO, so we'll see if we can set up a meeting for you. Only then did Sokol begin purchasing the shares that made up his $10 million position. And less than a month later, he was pitching the idea to Buffett. It is impossible to prove Sokol's intent here, but the appearance is that he's trying to front-run a potential acquisition. In other words, he was only trying to make the deal happen so that he could make millions on it. The audit committee concedes that a narrow reading of the company bylaws might allow Sokol to argue his actions were allowed, but they note that in Buffett's biannual letter to his CEOs, he states specifically, quote, "If it's questionable whether some action is close to the line, just assume it is outside and forget about it." In the deal-making industry, reputation was everything, and Sokol's actions were a stain for Berkshire. David Sokol resigned on March 26th, less than 4 months after he acquired his shares and less than 1 month after the Lubrizol acquisition. He maintained that since he had zero input on Berkshire's actual investment decisions, then the purchase should have been fine. Upon being given a chance to read the draft of Berkshire's press release announcing his resignation, Sokol objected to one line. The audit report says it was a passage that implied Mr. Sokol had resigned because he must have known the Lubrizol trades would likely hurt his chances of being Mr. Buffett's successor. Mr. Sokol told Mr. Buffett that he had not hoped to be Buffett's successor and was resigning for reasons unrelated to those trades. In a CNBC interview that felt an awful lot like damage control, Sokol said he resigned to spend more time with his family and to try and invest his own money and create a mini Berkshire. The timing on that, though, come on. To be fair, though, all parties agreed that Sokol had tried to resign in the past and been persuaded not to, so maybe? CNBC's Becky Quick points out in the interview that his answer about building a mini Berkshire is odd, asking, I guess the question that some people have asked is, why create your own mini Berkshire when you could have been running the actual Berkshire? Buffett, for his part, also implied that Sokol was not the man who would take his place. In a 2012 interview with CNBC, he said that the name in the envelope was the same person it had been for the last 5 years. But what was he going to say? That given all the time and candidates Berkshire had in front of them, that the best they could come up with was a guy with either poor ethics or bad judgment? Is it possible that Sokol thought what he was doing was fine? If you squint hard enough, you can believe it. And he did start something of a mini Berkshire with his family money. It's a private firm, but from SEC filings I found, he has made investments in a few banks plus a transportation conglomerate. The problem with this whole story is that one of two things had to have happened, and they both feel impossible. Either Sokol thought his purchases were okay, despite Berkshire's emphasis on keeping a squeaky clean reputation, or he knew they fell in a gray area but was willing to risk his job and the job for a quick payday. $3 million may seem like a lot to you, but for him it was only a fraction of his yearly salary. So we've got ignorance or greed. Either way, he proved himself unworthy of running Berkshire and maybe even caught them off guard when he did it. Without putting a name to the shortcomings, Charlie Munger, Buffett's original right-hand man and someone whose name is most certainly not in the envelope since he's now nearly 100, perfectly summarized the ordeal.
You take the whole of human literature. Some of the greatest plots are all the same. Great hero with great qualities has flaw. World brings huge pain to hero from flaw. This is the oldest story. This is the Greek tragedies. This is Shakespeare. This is just the way the world works.
Obviously, what it means for a hero to experience great pain is relative. Sokol was most recently in the news for buying a $20 million mansion in Florida. But I'm reminded of a quote from Eliot Spitzer, disgraced governor of New York, when asked about a new job he'd taken at Slate, one many up-and-coming journalists would die for. He said, It sucks. I used to be governor of New York. David Sokol is doing great, but the first line of his Wikipedia page isn't about who he is, but rather who he was. He used to be heir to the throne at Berkshire. Thanks for watching, guys.